Hey there, welcome to Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. It's time to plant onions right in the dead of winter. Well, we had our first freeze tonight, last night, and it got down to about 31, and it stayed there for about an hour and a half. That was long enough to cause some damage in the garden. So I'll show you what damage that caused, but then we're going to come back to this bed and we're going to plant some onions. They'll handle the winter just fine. Well, we had our first freeze. It was a short and brief freeze, but this will give us an opportunity to see what happened in the garden and what plants are frost tolerant and which ones aren't. It looks like the cauliflower here took some damage, but part of that plant should bounce back. Cabbage, of course, is freeze hardy, so that's good. This plant, I've harvested the broccoli off of it, as you can see, and we're waiting to see if it'll put out side shoots. This was one of my many plants that were damaged by aphids, so I probably should remove those leaves. I've been threatening to, but they're still a little green in there, doing a little bit of work. Yeah, so over here, I let this go to seed. Got the bees loving the flowers. This is my Chinese broccoli, and it is cold hardy, stood up well. The oh man, this is a bok choy type plant. I forgot the name, but anyway, it's doing good too. It's freeze hardy. It's not snail hardy, as you can see. My daikon radishes took some hits, but the leaves down inside where the frost wasn't able to settle, they're fine. So these will pull through. Same with these over here. This top layer is damaged. You can see it's wilty like that. But there's leaves down inside that are doing fine. These are actually ready to harvest. So I'm just storing them in the ground until I'm ready to eat them. The celery did fine, pulled through like a champ. The collard greens are looking a little bit like they suffered a bit, so we may have to eat some collard greens. But again, it's only a few leaves on the plant, so should be fine. My peas, well, peas are cold hardy, but they're not wind hardy, and they've been flopping around out here, so I don't mind if they come up to the top of this trellis and then flop over like that. They'll still put on peas. But all this in here, the rutabagas, they look wind blown, and some of the leaves have been damaged by the frost. Same with the kohlrabi, but there looks to be enough healthy leaves that these ought to bounce back. Won't be pretty. That's what happens when you try to grow in the winter. Garlic looks like it's doing all right. Dill's doing fine. My borage right here, borage came up volunteer. It looks like it's leaning and not liking this weather too much. That's okay. So what we'll do is everything that dies off in the freeze will go into compost. Carrots, of course. I've grown carrots in the snow, so yeah, well, you know, winter gardening, that's what it's all about. Gonna plant some onions today, right over there. Now, most onions are cold hardy. You can see here, these are spring onions, and they survived the freeze just fine. Most onions are cold hardy down to, you know, the high 20s. Don't think we're gonna get that here. But we're gonna go ahead and plant some onion starts, and I'll show you how to do that. Now, you can start onions in a number of ways. You can start them from seeds. You've got to do that earlier than what I'm doing right now. You can use onion sets. Onion sets are dried onions that were grown last year, and you just plug them in. The little tiny bulbs you plug in, and they'll grow the next year for you. Or you can use what I've got, these transplants, these little baby onion plants. And I got these from Dixondale Farms, and there are about 30 or 40 of them in here. This is a southern variety pack. When you grow onions, you have to grow onions according to where you live. There are three types of onions. There's a short day onions like these, and they don't require as much sunlight as like the long day onions. Those are the ones for the northern zone 6, zone 5, zone 4, and above. There's also an indeterminate, or not indeterminate, an intermediate day neutral type of onion, and those are good for like zone 7 and zone 7, zone 8 maybe. Check a map, do some research, and find out what grows best in your area. Here in the south, we need short day onions. They don't require as much sunlight. and they will grow from about now, middle of winter to very early spring, and they will be ready to harvest in the late spring. So we're gonna plant these. I got these from Dixondale Farms here in Texas. There are 3 varieties in here. There's a purple, a yellow, and a white, and they are all varieties for our area. So short day variety pack, let's start planting. I'm gonna grow in this little raised bed. There's a hugelkultur base down here, lots of logs and sticks and twigs. It's got some expired potting soil on the surface. I had to deal with ants in here, so we got rid of the ants. And we're gonna put a little topping of fresh potting soil on the top. I've amended this with some organic fertilizer, and that's important because onions are heavy feeders. So you wanna give them a good start, amend your soil with some organic fertilizer, and then every 3 weeks during the growing season, you wanna come and give them a high nitrogen, like an organic high nitrogen liquid fertilizer. I'm going to use fish emulsion or something similar every 3 weeks, and that should get these things bulking up. So let's get this topped off and I'll show you what we're going to do. I'm filling this up to the top because it is a hugelkultur bed, and as the material down at the bottom begins to decay, it's going to settle a bit. And we should see that around harvest time. We should see about an inch or 2 of settling. All right, that's ready for onions. Looks like we got more white and yellows than red and purples, but that's okay. So here's what we have. That's what we're dealing with, an onion plant. You want to plant them no deeper than 1 inch. And so I'm just going to come over here and plug them in just like that. And you want to keep them about 4 inches apart. You want to have space for the bulbs to bulk up. And so we're going to do 4 inches apart or so, about 1 inch deep. If you go any deeper, it won't bulb. And these onions require as much sunlight as you can give them. Unfortunately, in this particular bed, I don't get as much sunlight as I think these onions will really thrive on, but I think it's sufficient for them. You can come and take some of these onions as green onions if you want before they bulk up. But I'm hoping to get some big onions this year because I want to make salsa from my garden. I have tomatoes that are coming in this spring. I've got tomatoes frozen in the freezer. I've got cilantro that I'll be freezing. I'll be growing some peppers. I've got garlic in the ground. I've got everything I need to make a good salsa. So we'll just have to see if we can get it done. These plants are cold hardy. Some onions are cold hardy down to about 20 degrees. We'll have to see about that. Let's see, I got room right there for one. If I need to thin these, I will. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to thin. Again, just barely put them in there. These roots about 1 inch deep. And that's all you need. We'll water them in really well. As they start to grow, the bulbs will bulk up and rise up out of the surface. Don't worry about that. Don't bury them. Don't try to cover them up. That's just the way onions go. Again, we will fertilize these every 3 weeks with a liquid fertilizer. So I've got a lot of onions here. I'm going to try to get them all in this bed. This bed had fire ants in it. They moved in pretty quickly, and I had to get rid of those. The only product I know that handles fire ants well in my area, you see, even this little dude has potential, so we'll put it in there. Little bitty guys. You can even just push them down with your finger 1 inch deep. Fire ants. The only product I've found that handles fire ants reliably, other than orange oil, which kills them on contact, but can also burn plants if they're in the area, is Amdro. Amdro is a brand name of ant pellets, and unfortunately I don't like using insecticides in the garden, but sometimes you have to do what you got to do. What, you're going to have fire ants, or are you going to get rid of them? Well, I had to get rid of them. I wouldn't be able to sit here and do this if there were fire ants in this garden. Okay, there's another little guy. Plant him right there, hope he comes up. Some of these, if they're too close, we will use them as green onions. All right, let's move to the other side. Dixondale Farms, who supplied these onions, has a very particular way they suggest you grow them, which includes rows and a trench down the middle between 2 rows of onions with fertilizer. You don't have to do it that way. That is a proven method, but I don't use like 13, 13, 13. I don't use the fertilizers that they recommend. So I'm just going to grow them in this bed and keep them fertilized, and we'll see what we get. I've done this a couple years ago with Dixondale onions, and they did well for me. Planted just in this manner. Just a big block of onions. And in a big block like this, you can care for them well because, well, they're all in one place. But if you've got some left over, let's say you've got a smaller space than this, and you're going to have some of these left over, you can just plug them in anywhere in your garden and treat them as green onions. Or, you can try to baby them along, fertilize them, and get bulbing onions out of them, but I like to just treat them as a block. All right, so again, we're just going 1 inch deep with these. Even the little ones like this, you want to plant 1 inch deep. Real easy. Now it's going to be cold tonight. It's not quite going to freeze, but that shouldn't matter. Like I said, onions are cold tolerant, and they'll grow through the winter. What you want to do, at least in my area, zone 9A on the Texas coast, is you want to have your onions planted so that they'll start growing through the winter, and ideally you'd go about 6 to 8 weeks prior to your average last frost date. My average last frost date here is March the 1st, which means that I'm about 8 to 10 weeks prior to that. So it's a little bit early, but we have mild winters here, so it shouldn't really matter. There we go. We're making some time here now. Last couple here. I've got some room down here now I can do something with. Wasn't planning on that. There's a little bitty guy. Don't know if he's going to make it, but we'll try it. Last one. All right, our onions are planted. Okay, we have planted our onions 1 inch deep, about 3 to 4 inches between each plant so they can have room for the bulbs to develop. And these will start growing right away. We're going to water them in, and a few days we're going to give them a dose of liquid fertilizer, get them off to their good start, and looking forward to this. Yeah, this makes me happy. Onions, real easy to grow from these young plants. Harder to grow from seed, but you can do it. You just have to start a few months earlier. I've never successfully grown onions from seeds. It seems to me to be a hassle when I can just buy my starts from Dixondale, and their varieties I know work well here. One day I will grow seeds. I will start them from seed. I'll start them in a flat. We'll separate them, prick them out, and when they're about this size, we'll put them in the ground. All right, so let's get some water on here, and like I said, fertilize every 3 weeks with a high nitrogen fertilizer, something like fish emulsion. You can do fish emulsion every 2 weeks since it's such a low dose, but it's high in nitrogen. Make sure that first number, 511 in most fish emulsion, make sure that first number is higher than the rest. That's what you need. And just keep watering these until they start bulbing up. We'll harvest these when we see the bulbs are nice and big, and the greens, the tops, the green part starts to flop over. That's when we know they're done. That's when we'll harvest. That'll be in the late spring. So if you want to follow these onions and anything else in my garden, subscribe to my channel. We really appreciate it. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And hey, we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.